By 67 BC, 3 years after his consulship, Pompeius Magnus was still in Rome. Following their joint consulship, neither he nor Crassus accepted provinces to govern, choosing instead to retire into private life and keep eyes on each other. Pompeius's version of private life, however, contained much political manipulation through the buying of senators whose task was to help the Senate come to the conclusion that only Pompeius Magnus could end the war against Mithridates. To this end, he spread bribe money amongst allies such as Publius Claudius, the brother-in-law of ex-consuls Lucullus, Metellus, and Rex, as well as any others Pompeius deemed useful within the newly restored plebeian tribunate. For the 67 BC year, a mid-level senator named Aulus Gabinius was among the candidates for the office of tribune of the plebs. We are told that either Gabinius was an intimate of Pompeius, already in his pay, or that he hoped to do a favor for Pompeius, by which he might later profit. On the wings of Pompeius's popularity, Aulus Gabinius won his seat. Armed with the knowledge that Lucullus was conducting an unsanctioned conquest of the East, Aulus Gabinius immediately began laying the groundwork to facilitate his senatorial recall. Unfortunately, a good majority of the Senate knew how desperately Pompeius wanted Lucullus's command, and were not about to give him the post simply because he wished for it. How many battles did Pompeius need? He already had Sicily, Numidia, Spain, and, although grudgingly, Spartacus. Pompeius was already considered the first man in Rome and, by 67 BC, the Senate, many of whom still remembered the dictatorship of Sulla, was growing concerned about just what Pompeius's endgame might be. In order to get around the Senate's suspicions concerning Pompeius's interest in Lucullus's command, Aulus Gabinius focused, instead, on the war against piracy. Centering around Cilicia, with Crete as a well-known pirate stronghold, this enemy's unpredictable attacks added ever-changing challenges to Rome's constant state of war. Marcus Antonius, who had been given a special command against piracy during the consulship of Lucullus, took up the fight long enough to allow for a temporary increase in maritime trade. In the end, Antonius was lured to Crete, and with Mithridates as the pirates' benefactor, Antonius was ambushed. The only way for Antonius to escape alive was to negotiate a peace treaty with the Cretans. But the Senate was not happy about the so-called treaty, which was only a victory for the pirates. For his failure, Antonius was mockingly called Creticus, or conqueror of Crete. The Senate then sent the ex-consuls, both of whom were married to sisters of Publius Claudius, to continue the war effort. Quintus Cecilius Metellus was sent to Crete, and Quintus Marcius Rex was sent to Cilicia. Despite their efforts, piracy on the seas continued to rise. As a response to the constant disruption in maritime trade, and simultaneous interruption of Rome's grain supply, Aulus Gabinius legislated the Lex Gabinia. This bill gave the Senate the authority to grant extreme proconsular powers to any ex-consul of the people's choosing. The jurisdiction of this unprecedented imperium included the whole of the Mediterranean, Tyrrhenian, Aegean, Adriatic, and Balearic seas, extending inland a full 50 miles from every coast. This bill also legislated, for its unnamed commander, a total of 500 warships, 120,000 infantry, and approximately 5,000 cavalry. The legislation also granted the commander a total of 144 million sesterces, or approximately $504 million, along with the use of any provincial treasury funds needed during the campaign. The term limit for the Lex Gabinia was to be granted for 3 years, so that whomever was chosen would have ample time to eradicate piracy completely. The Senate, however, was not stupid. Even though Pompeius's name was never mentioned during the debates for Aulus Gabinius's legislation, who else were the people going to choose? And the people, granted the authority to give one person such unprecedented powers, were too concerned and uncomfortable with their material losses and empty stomachs to care whether or not such legislation carried with it the threat of tyranny. Thinking only of their safety, they wouldn't hesitate to hand over so much power to one man. Gaius Calpurnius Piso, the consul for the 67 BC year, led the opposition to this proposed law. As an aristocratic and conservative senator himself, he soon swayed a large portion of the Senate's conservative faction to oppose the bill. In response, another tribune of the plebs named Gaius Cornelius, whom we can surmise was also in the pay of Pompeius, proposed an unrelated law outlining the shameless abuses of the aristocracy. This new law was aimed directly at the consul, Piso, who had been accused of bribery and cheating in order to win his consular seat. This forced Piso to spend a good portion of the year trying to resist the Lex Cornelia's attempts to eliminate bribery at elections, while simultaneously separating him from his conservative allies. Because the Senate could not side with Piso without looking like they supported corruption, Piso fought a lone battle. The Lex Cornelia, of which we know little, forced the Senate to conclude that the punishments proposed were so severe that no accusers would ever come forward, nor would any judge even try such cases knowing that the losing side of a trial would always accuse them of having accepted a bribe. In the end, Piso's co-consul, Manius Acilius Glabrio, helped to provide a solution. Glabrio was the same judge, known to be above accepting bribes, who oversaw Cicero's prosecution of Gaius Verres for the plundering of Sicily. Glabrio sat down with Piso, and together, they wrote the Lex Acilia Calpurnia. This proposed bill was a less stringent form of Cornelius's attempted Lex Cornelia. It imposed fines on the offender, along with exclusion from whichever public office he'd won through bribery. As the consuls, allied with the senatorial aristocracy, fought this lengthy battle, Aulus Gabinius successfully passed his Lex Gabinia. The Roman people, not caring that such a law set the precedent for legal tyranny, named Pompeius Magnus the recipient of the Lex Gabinia command. Because the majority of the Roman Empire laid within a 50-mile radius of the coast, Pompeius Magnus became the most powerful man in every province, except those few which lay beyond the 50-mile mark. Even proconsuls of individual provinces were expected to obey the commands of Pompeius Magnus. Dividing the waters into 13 zones, Pompeius Magnus assigned a fleet to each zone, and placed each fleet under one of his praetorian commanders. The fleets were then set to patrolling the waters, which immediately curtailed much of the pirate activity. On the island of Crete, the Metellus, who had been given command against the pirates following the disaster of Antonius Creticus, had made great strides in subjugating the pirate stronghold. Because Mithridates was preoccupied with trying to recover his own losses, the Cretans no longer had protection from Pontus. As soon as they learned of Pompeius's unique command, they sent a deputation to Rome's most powerful man, offering to surrender the island of Crete to him personally. The Cretans hoped to negotiate better terms for their surrender from Pompeius than they were likely to receive from Metellus, who was currently defeating them across Crete. Metellus, who had enjoyed great success in the conquest of Crete's pirate guilds, had done too much work to let the rewards go to Pompeius because of some special command. So, when Pompeius accepted Crete's surrender, and ordered Metellus to leave the island along with his troops, Metellus refused. Instead, he kicked his campaign into high gear, and concluded his invasion of Crete before Pompeius arrived. Unfortunately, for his conquest of Crete, the triumph and other honors Metellus had earned were delayed for several years. Pompeius, angry that Metellus had defied him, and denied him the conquest of Crete, used his senatorial allies to block the Senate's every effort to reward Metellus, who eventually earned the genuine cognomen of Creticus. Regarding the Lex Gabinia, Plutarch informs us that Aulus Gabinius, quote, drew up a law which gave him, Pompeius, not an admiralty, but an out-and-out monarchy and irresponsible power over all men, end quote.